Hello, everyone. Welcome aboard Clandestine International Airlines Flight 17. We are currently attaining our cruising altitude of 32,000 feet en route to Shambhala International Airport at an undisclosed location somewhere in the Himalayan mountains or possibly the Himalayan mountains. And as always, if you know how to pronounce that, please feel free to correct me in the comments. I always stand open to correction. We're going through some rather nice weather today. It was some clouds and a little difficulty taking off, but we're flying along nicely. Of course, we're here with our co-pilot and electronics warfare officer, Roger Hansen, so we know we're in good hands. I'm going to turn off the seatbelt light and turn on the smoking lamp. The smoking lamp is lit. Smoke them if you've got them. We also have coffee, tea, milk, and water available, a collection of fruit juices. And I think I'm ready to switch on the automatic pilot. So off we go. Roger, how are you today?
I am doing fine. It seems like the temperature is going back up. We had two cold days back to back. I don't think winter wants to die out anytime soon.
No, no, we had some rather warm days, but it's yesterday it was beautiful up in the upper 60s and breezy. You could feel that spring in the air, but today we've had snow and it's been down in the 30s and going down even lower tonight. So yeah, old man winter is he's not giving up without a fight. But that's often the way. These things aren't usually clear cut. You know, there's always a kind of a liminal area where things aren't quite spring and they're not quite winter. And I find the spring can be especially frustrating because you have 2 or 3 days of really warm weather. And like you're saying, Rod, suddenly you've got 2 days of really cold back to back, right when you're all ready to put away the winter clothes and stuff. And yeah, it hits you when you're not looking, can really blindside you. But that's the nature of life, isn't it? You
Sure
never
is.
really know what's going to happen. Yeah, yeah. You know, there was a guy who said the really interesting things are the things you don't expect. And when he said interesting, I just thought of the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
Oh,
they're,
oh,
they're
there's
never.
times when there's times when you really want boredom, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like sometimes you just. It all sounds good until it happens. You know what I mean? It's like, whatever.
Hmm.
I think I slept like a polar bear yesterday.
Really?
Yeah,
Good. You need to get more sleep.
like man.
We can't all be Mark Edworthy.
Yeah, it's true.
Survives on like 2 or 3 hours of sleep a day and somehow has the rest. We
he ar-
mere mortals, we
eh,
mere colonials can't do that.
he argues with me because I say that it's unhealthy to sleep only 5 hours a day every day, and he's like, "That is nonsense." I'm like,
But
whatever, man.
everybody's got a different biological clock, I guess. But I always figure you've only got so many heartbeats, you know,
Yeah,
and we need to sleep just like slow them down a little bit. But no, everyone's different. I've heard that Napoleon would go on like 3 hours of sleep a night sometimes, which other people really need their 8 hours. And yeah, sleep is important. Sleep is important. But it's true what you say about when we think we want things and we go for them, but we don't always give them enough thought. And when we get them, we suddenly discover there are all these aspects of them that we hadn't thought about before. But guy I used to know used to say, and it's a saying that's actually given me a lot of comfort over the years. I don't know why, but he said, nothing is ever as good or as bad as you think it's going to be, which I think that's a really interesting and important point because it shows us that our imagination of future events is always going to fall short, obviously, because unless you're actually experiencing something, you only have the thought of it. And our thoughts, in which we spend most of our time living, our thoughts are always going to be incomplete and they're always going to be colored by our own mind's hopes and fears, our expectations, and this is something that we simply can't avoid. Um, you know, I've talked before about how meditation, a lot of it has to do with being in the present moment, and we have a lot of that in our culture. It's something that's been picked up from Buddhism and other Eastern contemplative traditions, that you simply have to be completely in the now. And when you can bring yourself totally into your awareness, sometimes they say the awareness of the body, the awareness of that you are here and you are you. In the Gurdjieff system, they would say, just remembering yourself, they would call it. You say, I am here, I am me, here I am, I'm right here. And if we can really rest in this present moment, then a lot of the suffering that comes from living inside of our thoughts is dispensed with. If you're spending all your time thinking of something that happened a week ago or a month ago or 25 years ago, you're going to have all of the misery that comes from that memory. Plus, while you're living in that memory, you want to fix it and you can't, and that's a further level of frustration. The same thing when we're worried about future events. So when we're here in the now, of course, a lot of that anxiety simply drops away. And unfortunately, there's been this idea that this is the goal, that you just be here now and that you don't have to worry about the past or the future. But that's not really the point, because it's not really going to solve any of the issues. We're here to solve our problems, not ignore them. And it's good to release ourselves from this pressure, but we have to use the strength that now we're given when these sufferings are taken from us, and we're here now. We have this power, really, and this gives us a chance to really look and see what you were doing. And until you're able to do that, you're not really going to be able to solve some of these problems that are coming from inside. And looking inside is so very difficult. When we suffer because of the way we think, the way we act, what we say and what we do, and what we think about, which is another kind of action. So that means we really kind of have to change what we're saying, what we're doing, and what we're thinking. And this is very difficult to do. And we know that we're doing things that are making us suffer. Very, very often, we see that these are ingrained habits. And a lot of times we don't like the habits. We want to get rid of them. We know they're causing us suffering, but they're ingrained in us. But there are other habits that we do like. We really want to hold on to them. A lot of times we define ourselves by them, but when we really can examine them, we see that they're making us unhappy as well. It's not like we're just going in from the outside and just removing this thing that's obviously wrong. We're on the inside, and there are habits and thoughts and actions that are so inexorably intertwined with everything we think about ourselves that it's very, very difficult to shake them off, to get rid of them. And we have a lot of defenses. When I first started looking inside, it's very difficult, and I would shy away. No, you can't look at that. No, that's you. This is how you define yourself. How would you ever not, do this or that? And we can even get to a point where we would rather have the suffering. Well, I know this is causing me suffering, but I must do this, sort of thing. And this is because when we try to look at these things, we're still partially living in them. So when we can be here now and completely get ourselves out of these mindsets and stare at these things, and it's so hard to look at them, when we can see them clearly, that's when we can say to ourselves the things that we have a lot of trouble saying, like, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore. Maybe this thing that has defined me for as long as I can remember, this thing that makes so much of a feeling of self-importance, of value in myself, maybe it's not really the right thing to do. And that is a difficult step to take. That is a difficult step to take. And I'm getting some messages.
Yep.
here, and aha. Yes, excuse me just a minute. I am getting a message from Shambhala International Airport from the control tower, and yep, everything seems to be all systems go. We saw they just sent a request to see if we needed any assistance, and I said we didn't need any at this time. So, but in any event, sorry about that interruption. Of course, the miracle of editing in our later produced show will be able to cope with that quite nicely, I'm sure. Our electronics warfare officer, Roger Hansen, is more than able to cope with any little thing like that that's tossed up.
It just adds
So,
accent to the show.
yeah, I love it. I love it. It's some nice sound effects in there too, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, once if we're able to release ourselves from these sufferings that we impose on ourselves through these thoughts, it's not enough just to like drop all thoughts. Then we have to start thinking more clearly. Then we have to start looking at things very, very hard. But getting there can be extremely difficult. Um, One of the things we have to be careful of is to not trade one addiction for another. We get very addicted to these mental states that we create. We sit back, we start daydreaming, and we think of something pleasant. And that has its drawbacks because even if you just have these pleasant thoughts that you lose yourself in, you eventually have to come back to here, and you can be very angry and resentful that you suddenly have to deal with things like cleaning the litter box, or working on the plumbing, or paying a bill, or going to work. That's not where you want to be. You want to be in this little world that you've created. And very often, unfortunately, often most of the time, we create these worlds full of regret, full of sadness, full of despair. And again, we sink into these. It's very easy to do. It's what we've learned all our lives. And indeed, we can come to enjoy any set of emotions because when you think about when you go into an emotional state, it's a drug. It's consciousness altering. You're releasing all sorts of interesting chemicals into the bloodstream. Adrenaline is a big one. There is such a thing as adrenaline addiction. Um, you have this roller coaster of emotions, and very importantly, you know exactly where it's going to go. So it's comfy. It's like a groove. It's an old groove, and even though you don't like the ride, at least you know the ride, sort of thing. So being able to separate ourselves from this can very easily lead to I'm here in the now. I don't have to worry about anything. So what if the baby's crying? So what if there's like a tornado warning? So what? That's not real. It's the past. It's the future. Um, you know that is not a good thing. You get the same effect with taking certain psychedelic drugs. And that's one of the problems with psychedelic drugs. They can catapult you into certain mind states, but if you don't have the mental preparation, the training in virtue, the training in mental discipline and understanding the workings of the mind and having a goal of what you want your mind to do, it's just a lot of flashing lights that can very easily distract you into worse states down the road. So, um, so I guess what I'm trying to say is this is a task that requires a lot of preparation, a lot of inner work, a clear idea of where you want to go, and importantly, keeping all this in mind when you finally get to a point where you can start looking at these things and hopefully do some work on yourself. So I think that's basically what I was going to say.
I mean, for me, when when it comes to like drug addiction and actually just like drugs in particularly, but the only thing that I really learned from a lot of that, other than tripping my balls off, was that like you need to do things. You need to make sure that you have proper amounts of vitamin C when you're taking LSD, because if you don't, you're gonna have a bad trip. you might actually kill yourself from dehydration if you don't make sure that you have, proper liquids. So it's a good idea to use vitamin C and drink a lot of orange juice. Um, Another thing, when it comes to using drugs safely, you need to make things like cookies. So when you're doing acid, you should probably have some orange juice and a lot of cookies baked, because sugar is good for you when you're doing stuff like that, and multivitamins. Um, and a lot of people don't like doing that because it a lot of people believe that it like cuts the high in half, but it's better to be safe than sorry. There's a lot of people who die because they don't think that stuff's necessary. So that's when it comes to drugs, that's about all that I can say when it comes to that, because I've been talking to people who are big on the DMT and stuff like that, and they think that they're having spiritual experiences, and I've never had any kind of spiritual experience from a drug. It's always just getting high. So for me, it's really hard for me as a drug addict to believe that people are actually having spiritual experiences rather than just being high and not knowing what being high is. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
Especially if they don't understand what the concept of being stoned is. If they're trying to intentionally do this stuff so that they can have a spiritual experience, they probably won't understand that it's only being high, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of something they said in the Church of the Subgenius, which was, how did he put it? I don't remember the exact words, but it was in the Book of the Subgenius, and it said that, drugs don't show you a different reality. Drugs don't give you spiritual insights. They only make you high,
mhm.
and you're simply drunk as a lord. And we can trigger. The human body is an interesting thing. And I always used to say, we are composed of chemicals, right? And we put chemicals into ourselves. And so we're like manipulating our own body chemistry.
All
But
right.
again, if you have like an experience where the brain is flooded with these chemicals, this might be very similar to something that's produced in a mystic state. But if it's just dropped on your head, you have no preparation, it's coming out of nowhere, and you don't have any way to connect it to your previous work and growth. It's like giving a small child, um, I don't know, a huge cup of coffee that's just gonna give it the shits, and it's gonna like zing it through the roof, but it's not really, to me, um, unless you have done the work to get your mind into a state where it's, to me, able to understand what it's doing to itself. Unless any experience like this is only going to be confusing. And, I think psychedelics can be used to produce insight. It's been used, they were doing some very interesting work in psychiatry in the 1950s. And Cary Grant underwent LSD therapy, where it was used in conjunction with mental work. And this gets me to, I have a friend of mine who was telling me, they have mental health issues, and they're always like, I just want the right drug. I just want the right treatment. If I can find the right pill, and they try this pill and they try that treatment, electromagnetic resonancing and this and that. And I keep trying to say, you can't just take a pill and turn a switch. This is your mind. It can only be changed very slowly and through a lot of inner work. Anything else is just like a surface thing. And you can take a pill and you might feel really happy. But unless you address the underlying causes of your unhappiness, that unhappiness is going to come back. And worse yet, the drug might very well keep you from following a path that might otherwise have helped you more. And I can see, like in the case with the LSD therapy, where the psychiatrist is helping the guy look at his life or her life, um, and try to think their way through things. If they can use that as an aid to that therapy, that's one thing. But you can't just take something and you're going to get enlightened. And that was one of the problems with the '60s. I remember reading, I think it was Art Klepps was talking about the early Millbrook experiments, where you had the Timothy Leary and Art Klepps, and I think Ram Dass was there, and a lot of the usual gang from the '60s psychedelic revolution. And he was saying we just had this idea that if we could just get high enough, if we could just get high enough, we'd be enlightened. And they would take huge quantities of LSD and other psychedelics. I guess they had this big empty room or something where they would just drop acid for days and days, and they had access. It was legal then, and they had access to huge amounts. And I don't think any of them came out of that particularly enlightened, simply through that alone. It was very. I don't really think it did much to help things for people. But yeah, no, I agree with you, Roger. It just makes you high. It doesn't really give you anything unless you can only give yourself these things. You can't get them from the outside.
No, like one thing that I've noticed, even with both spirituality and with religion, it's usually self-valuation is really what, if you want to go to that next level, um, like how we've been talking about looking inside and looking at ourselves and trying to come up with ways of correcting our character defects. You know what I mean? Our shortcomings. Um, that actually to me is what I know actually works. You know what I mean? And like
Mhm.
when you start changing your behaviors, like you were talking about, that's a big thing. And I think um, a lot of people hate hearing the word moral or the two words moral psychology, but that's
Mm.
basically what moral psychology is about. And moral psychology doesn't mean that you go to a shrink and sit down on a couch and spill your guts to them and everything's okay. It's a lot more complicated than all that. It's like you say a
Yeah.
lot. It's an action word. It's action. That's what it comes down
Hmm.
to. So,
Exactly. Yeah. And action is karma. So we're staying Buddhist here. But we were talking before about like the present moment, and we've always got a present moment, and we've got all those past moments, and the present moment is the result of our past intentions, our present intentions, and the result of our present intentions. But the present moment goes by so quick, bam, 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 right?
yep.
So we're always putting together a new present moment, and when we're out of our own heads, we're just grappling with anything. We keep wanting to build the present moment, and we just tend to have this inertia. It's just this. It's like a momentum from all of these past actions we've done, all of these past bad habits and stuff. We just can't look at them very clearly because, like I said, we define ourselves by this stuff. And you were talking about when you were a heavy metal man.
Right.
You know, I'm sure that you would not. You wouldn't suddenly just out of the blue say to yourself, "Hey, you know what? Maybe I should get a haircut and get a job, or do
Oh
whatever
no,
and stop doing this."
no,
That's
that
not
no,
you, man. You're too cool.
that would have been nonsense. I mean, my goodness, nobody in Iron Maiden had short hair. Why would I do that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You know.
And that's the momentum from everything you did. But eventually you slowed down enough and took a good look at yourself.
Well, plus you don't really look good with long hair and cut up jeans when you're like 45 years old. You just people don't look at you the same. It just all the glitter and the glare is gone.
Yeah.
You know, and so you have to start wearing pants that doesn't have holes in it. And try to speak English as much as possible, even though you know. So
You
just
got wisdom. You got a little wisdom in your life.
well, that's what they call it. I don't know if it's wisdom or not, but I know that it really teaches you a lesson that when you're, especially like the 40s was the real big deal. You know what I mean? Like I
Uh-huh.
I had a few things left over in my 40s that I needed to get rid of from back when I was younger. Like I had this idea that having a receding hairline was horrible and it didn't look good. So I'd shave my hair off to make sure that I didn't show my receding hairline. And then I was like, man, you know what? By the time I hit 50, I was like, man, stop trying that. Just let your hair grow if you want it. If it doesn't, who cares? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who are you
Yeah.
trying to impress? So,
You realize the stuff you thought was important really isn't all that important.
right. And I think, like, most people who are in their 30s, they think they're all grown up because they had kids and stuff, you know? They've had a family. But they don't realize, like, that's just halfway there. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I really started settling down until I was like in the later part of my 40s. And then when I hit 50, I was like, whatever. You know, that's like, I'm halfway through a
Uh,
century, man. What am I trying to prove, you know?
uh, it's
So,
funny, I've read books where I was reading this book about, it was written by a younger person, and he was trying to describe being old, and it was all full of like, oh my God, this is terrible. And it's like, I'm relatively old, and I know I can't do the things I could do 40 years ago. I don't
mhm,
have the strength. I don't have the lack of pain that I don't have now.
mhm,
Um, and I can even think about it, but it doesn't really bother me much. I'm just who I am. These are just my limitations, I guess. But it does take me a little longer to get up the stairs, and it's a little more difficult to stand up sometimes. But it doesn't really worry me, you know. And in this description, it's like he's just like wailing about, "Oh my goodness, I used to be able to do this, and I used to be able to do this." It's just not, Again, like you're saying, it's like who cares? I'm
yeah,
doing what I'm doing. I look like I look. I joke about it, but it's like, yeah, no, like you start your hair starts thinning. You don't have as many teeth. You don't, and certainly you just can't move nearly as fast. I can't pick up the stuff I used to work on roofs. I don't think I could do that right now. I
yeah.
could not do roofing right now. Thank you very much.
Carrying
But
shingles up on your
that's something
shoulder.
I'm actually kind of glad of that I'm not qualified for that anymore. It's
Yeah.
like I can't carry that 80 pounds of shingles up the ladder right now. You go ahead. Uh, so
You
yeah,
start.
when you're in the midst of it, and that gets back to that, the present moment, even though we ignore it a lot, it does basically bring itself to your attention because it is what is real. And what's real is this body we have and the situation we're in. And the more we can focus on it, the more we can really cope with it well. And I know one thing I found, the more I can stay in the moment, and like I said, not just stay in the moment to zone out, but stay in the moment and pay attention what I've got to do right in front of me. If I, instead of worrying about what I have to do tomorrow or the next day or next week, if I just work on what I've got now, I do find it's amazing. But when tomorrow or next week actually gets here, I'm able to cope with what I've got in front of me a lot better because it's just something in front of me. And I came to realize finally that like 80% of my problems had to do with me thinking about my problems before I actually had to deal with them.
Mhm.
And again, I think that comes with age a bit because the present moment becomes more and more insistent. I just got this nice shooting pain in my thumb just now from my arthritis, reminding me, yes, I'm right here in the moment. It's kind of like that big Zen master in the sky, in
Mhm.
Zen Buddhism, where they whack you every so often upside the head with a stick. You got a few
Yeah.
guys on the Discord that have that attitude, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like, pay attention. There are things that, as we get older, that I think naturally help bring us wisdom.
Was like when you were talking about living in the moment and everything. I think a lot of people do. I agree with you on that, where they do kind of mix that whole concept up because, like, for me, I've learned one day at a time, but I've also
Hmm.
learned do the task at hand. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that's really what that means. It's like learn how to do what's in front of you. You know what I mean? So sometimes
Yeah.
when you overthink it and you go too far ahead, like you can't think about what you need to do tomorrow if you haven't got what's in front of you taken care of. You know?
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
and it's like setting goals. You have short-term goals, you have mid-term goals, and then you have long-term goals. And everybody automatically thinks they need to jump to the long-term goals and determine what those are and do it backwards, when in reality you need to look at today and say, okay, what is it that I want to do today? You know, and
Right.
where do I want this to go? Now, you can change your mind later on. It's perfectly fine to change your mind if you wish to, but that means you're also going to have to change your short-term goals, your mid-term goals, and your long-term goals to go along with that. Because
Right.
you can't have everything. A lot of people think you can have everything, but you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
That's always disappointing to people. Why can't I do everything and have everything? And it's like, you
it's.
just can't. You just can't.
I mean, it's like, I mean, you've heard me falling asleep at the computer. It's because I want everything. I want it all, and sometimes I got to catch myself. And
Yeah.
when, when
Yeah.
when I do that stuff, that means I'm biting off more than I can chew, and I need to slow down. You know,
Yeah.
so
That, that's so difficult because, eventually, if we want to say yes to one thing, we have to say no to something else.
right.
If I want to do this, I can't do that. If I want to do that, I can't do this. And I'm just as guilty. I always am biting off more than I can chew. But I've learned over the years to be careful of how I bite because I realize more and more that I just can't do everything, and I can't even do, like I say, nearly as much. We have less energy, but on the other hand, um, as you say, if you do the thing at hand, that clears the decks for a much better tomorrow.
Hmm.
Because if you're trying to, like you were saying, you go for that long-term goal first until you clear the decks of everything ahead of time, there's no way you can accomplish anything.
I've been noticing momentum too. Like if you just naturally work on what you need to do now, it builds momentum so that you have it's kind of like what you're doing right now. If you do it on a regular basis, it builds a momentum that gives you a little bit of space. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
like especially when I'm editing videos, if I take and I edit the videos and I have them ready, I always schedule them out. And because I schedule them out, that gives me a time, like a buffer to where,
right,
you know what I mean, to where I don't have to always be worried about having something posted
right. It
at
gives you
a
a framework.
right, you know, and it's that momentum. The more you do it, the more momentum it builds, and you don't have to like be planning out a month from now what you're going to be doing or anything else because it's taken care of.
Right.
I know.
Yeah. And that's, that momentum is something not just with like our external projects, but like for, our internal selves too, because it's getting you into the momentum of keeping up the work habits, you know?
Hmm.
And it's important that we create good momentum because it's very easy to create bad momentum too,
Yeah.
you know? The
Um,
momentum itself, I always used to say the forces are agnostic. The momentum is momentum. You can direct it any way you want, and too many people direct it negatively. But again, it once you learn the secret of that, and it reminds me of something Aristotle said about how excellence is the result of habit of action. You know, you're not born with an excellence, but if you act excellently, If you act virtuously, you will build virtue. You'll become virtuous. If you act consistently to produce good material to keep up your timetable, that'll, again, like you say, it'll build up momentum in that direction. And the next thing you know, you'll have like umpteen million different shows and all these channels and stuff, and you'll be the hardest working man on the internet, Roger Hansen.
I'm still working on the virtue.
Well, you're doing pretty good.
I could do better, you
Well,
know.
that's a very virtuous statement.
I mean, that's one of the things that I think a lot of us want to do is we want to be virtuous, but the only problem that stands in the way is us. I'm like, because
Yeah.
I remember when I was first sobering up, I got the Bible and I was always reading the Book of Psalms because that's the book of virtues, the Christian virtues, and I would do it every day, and it would make me feel real good and everything, but I'd never be able to stay virtuous. You know what I mean? There would always be that moment where I couldn't stay on task when it comes to that. And I think virtue is a really, really, really hard thing to really keep. Um, the cuss
Yeah.
words is I think the hardest part. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but it's not. Like just trying to stop cussing. You know, it's real hard for me at least. I
Well,
mean,
any anytime you set yourself a task like that, like to clean up your language, it is good to clean up your language because the way we speak affects the way we think. And if we speak sloppily, we will think sloppily, and they'll reinforce each other. But it's also, if you can also look at it as, and I mean, it also is, if you're consciously trying to clean up your language and stop cussing, it's also making you more alert and making you think more. It's making you pay attention, and it's making you aware of yourself. Because, whenever you tell yourself you're not going to do something like that, I'm sure the first thing you notice is, man, I cuss a lot.
yeah,
Something you probably didn't even notice before.
yeah,
So already you're getting more insight into your mind,
yep.
and I've got to say your language has been very good, on the show and on the shows that I've heard you on for the most part.
Well, I give all the credit for that to V.
Really?
Yeah, like being around V has made me a better person, 100%. Like,
Wow.
uh, uh, he is a wild man, and like whenever I'm around V, it makes me want to be a better person because like he's such a wild man that he doesn't realize like he's reflecting back on me. You know what I mean? Everything that I see in him is stuff that I do. So
Ah.
it's kind of like how people always say you're just projecting yourself.
Hmm.
Well, if you're not saying anything and you're just observing, you start recognizing, man, I do that.
Hmm.
and
Wow.
and then when you start recognizing that you do that, and you just stop judging people and just keep it to yourself. I don't know what it is. It just makes you to where you're more aware of it, and you don't do it as much anymore. So um, it's really interesting how it is with being um, around V. It really is. He kind
Well,
of.
see, V, if you're listening, you see, you've served as a terrible example.
Oh, he knows. I tell him all the time. I'm like, dude, you are just a horrible, horrible example.
uh,
He just laughs at me.
I'm sure he enjoys it. I'm sure it's a compliment, but
Yeah.
and it is. But it's good that you can see that. Very often I think it's been said that sometimes when we dislike someone, it's because we see something in their behavior that reflects ours, like
Hmm.
things that we do that we don't like, but we won't admit it. But when we see someone else doing it, we can get especially offended at it. But then to see someone as a mirror is really a further step. And there was a line in a book, I forget the exact line, but I'm sure you've heard me say it before. Beware of the fault in another, that thou mayst correct it in thyself, because if it didn't exist in you, you wouldn't be able to recognize it in them.
Right.
And, the opposite of that is the problem that people have. Very often people that are extraordinarily nice and honest simply assume that everybody else is just as nice and honest, because they don't have inside of themselves, they would never think of doing something, wrong or mean or something like that. And so very often they're the victims of all sorts of cons and things like that. That guy wouldn't lie. He looks so honest, and I'm sure he had the deed to the Brooklyn Bridge. I just signed over the paperwork. Of course, he's a prince from Namibia. He's going to give me $1 trillion. He just needs my social security number and all my banking information. So, to take the step and see others as a mirror that's a lot of wisdom there, Roger.
Well, I mean, it's there's a saying that used to be really, really popular. I believe it was Cheryl Lee. She's the one who said it, but it said that you can love me for my good character, but you better love me for my character defects. I believe it was. And that really stuck to me when I first heard it, because it was like when you take a look, especially at couples whenever they've been married like for hundreds of years, they actually learn each other. They learn like what their flaws are and their character defects are, and they still love each other for it. And I really 100% believe that it's because they love each other for their flaws and not for their good character and all that stuff. You know what I mean? And I've heard people have conversations about that stuff too. You know what I mean? Things that drive them crazy about the other person, but they still love them, still overlook their flaws. They actually enjoy them more than they dislike them. So,
there was an old literary reference about the man that would come in and he would leave his hat on the table instead of hanging it up, and he used to drive his wife crazy. But then one day she considered and said to herself, "I would miss that hat on the table." You would miss that. And the thing with couples, especially couples that have been together a long time, and I know some of the people listening tonight are parts of such couples, is we're all very different. And from the outside, a relationship can look very odd, and from the inside, it can feel very normal. Especially when we are, all of us, extremely flawed. And we are, none of us, experts at removing these flaws. I've spent decades trying to improve myself, and we all are. And there's self-help videos and talks and books. Remember books?
yeah.
All over the place. People used to read books on this even back in the old days, and I remember. So there's no such thing as I don't think, a quote unquote normal relationship. People find people that they can live with, in despite of, and maybe even because of these flaws, even shared flaws. And something else occurs to me too, when you're talking about one person sees a flaw, that's not necessarily a flaw for someone else. I think Plato, and my arguments with Plato used to say, we see something beautiful and that can grow into love. But I don't think so. I think that which we love, we find beautiful. I don't think that which is beautiful we necessarily love. Very often not. Very often the opposite. But if, love is separate from these things and companionship is separate from this. So it gets back to the mind coming first. Your mind determines what you perceive and how you perceive it. And your mind can look at your partner, your friends, your pets, your world with love, or with not love, with fear, with resentment, with envy, with sloth. You know, we can go through all of the seven deadly sins if you like, and they're all in there. You
Yeah.
know, so I think that's I think that's part of it is what's coming out of us. What kind of vibes are we? I'm just gonna sound like a hippie, aren't I? It's like what kind of vibes you send out into the universe, though, is really going to determine how you perceive the universe. And I think a lot of us are able to perceive beauty, perceive heart and soul, um, if we open ourselves to it, and if we're kind of giving that back. And that's going to override anything that, someone will look from the outside and say, oh well, how could this person like that person when they're like this or that. Everybody can find somebody. Everybody likes somebody different, and there's always somebody that will understand you, and that's how we get friends. That's how we find friends that can. I mean, some of these get-togethers we have, normies could not handle it.
Yeah.
you know but that's part of the fun of having a group of people that can look past that. So I think for each other we don't really have these flaws, you know
Yeah.
um but we will for some, but you know so.
When we were having a conversation about music and artificial intelligence, and I was talking about like the tone of music,
Hmm.
um, and how like I was trying to sync up Jaffe's voice with artificial music, and it wasn't working out because he had flaws in his voice when he sang. You know,
Right.
now
Yeah.
the thing of it is like you can look at that as a flaw in a negative way, or you can look at it like the way Maestro would look at what do they call it, accentuating music.
Uh-huh.
Like when you listen to these orchestras playing and they're playing these instruments, you know what I mean? They don't just like systematically put the notes out. Like they have to move their fingers a certain way and their voice has to change a certain way. It's
Right.
not it's not a perfect tone that starts and finishes at the exact time that it's supposed to, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at flaws, and you got to kind of look at it like that too. What you would consider flaws might not actually be a flaw. It could be just accenting,
Right. Right. It's the
accent.
blues. Yeah. Well, that's there is that difference between the perfectly mechanically reproduced voice, and one of the big things that we musicians banter about, but a lot of people have talked about, is auto tuning. You probably heard of, and basically devices that allow, like, if you're a singer, well, or just not a singer, you sing or screech or yell into the microphone, and the computers basically give you perfect pitch and changes your voice so that what comes out the other end is perfect. And you can do this again with just about every instrument, not just the voice. And it allows you to produce these antiseptically perfect little bits of music. And some people like that, and I mean, it's listenable. But there is those imperfections, those flaws, as you were saying, or imperfections that you get with. I mean, that's what things like jazz and the blues are all about. I mean, you can joke about how, there aren't that many different actual tunes used in like some of these blues songs and stuff. Dun, 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 these 12-bar boogies and stuff.
Hmm.
But everyone plays it a little different. Everyone has their flaw. I mean, I love listening to these old blues singers from like the 1910s and 20s. I mean, these are not perfect voices, man. This is not, it would, and there would be no charm to it. There'd be no fun. And when you've got, and I think I was talking about it when we were discussing that, how when you're playing music with a bunch of guys, nobody sounds perfect, but part of the fun is everybody kind of adapts to everyone else. So it's kind of a synergistic kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And the next thing you know, you've got six guys playing a song that is nothing at all like you'd hear it on the album, not at all like it's written, but it's a really good version of the song.
Right.
So this is part of the fun of playing music. It's a little different. That's part of the fun of playing covers. I mean, um, we cover this song by Counting Crows called Remedy, which is a good song. I like our version better because we do it like very heavy rock, little touch of heavy metal to it, and but when the album comes out, you'll be able to compare. There's not going to be an album coming out, but you know what I mean. It's fun to take it and make it your own, and that's going to mean by definition you're going to change it, so it's going to be quote unquote flawed. But yeah, and again, it comes down to what you want, and I'm sure the AI could be adjusted to add flaws to it. You know, what the heck? I'm not trying to make an argument about human versus machine music, because at the end of the day, the music itself, that's
Yeah.
one thing. Um, and my thing of it is, my interest really isn't in the music part. My interest is, I'm a hobbyist. I like to make the music. I don't really listen to much music. I play music, but I don't really listen to it much. That's kind of odd. I listen to almost no music.
I have to admit something that I'm guilty of. No, I was talking about Iron Maiden before. Um, I, I I love I love their studio version music. Like all their live stuff to me sucks,
Right?
but I love all the stuff they do in the studio. I'm guilty of it. And I love Iron Maiden, but I just like the stuff that
Yeah.
they do in the studio, and I know that it's cleaned up and doctored up and everything, but it just is, to me it sounds better, you know.
Well, some bands do sound better that way. The Rolling Stones. I remember. I'm not a huge Stones fan. They've done some good songs. But it's not. I might have like one or two albums or something. That's not. But it's like when I listen to them, I'm like, when they play in the studio, they sound like they're playing live, and when they play live, they sound like they're rehearsing.
Hmm.
They just had this, and then like 50 years later, and they're still going, and I'm like, I guess this is the sound they want, because obviously they've been playing for decades. They could play a little tighter if they wanted to, but it's what the fans expect, and so for them it was almost like their imperfection was their perfection.
Right.
That, and it's all in the sound you want, but I think that's, well, of course it's personal taste too, but I think it's also the band. But I always like the studio Stone stuff better, because it just sounded more well done. On the other hand, the first, sometimes, like the band Queen.
Yeah.
First time I heard Queen was the Live Killers album, which was great. But then I started listening to the studio albums, and I was like, whoa, this isn't nearly the same. Lacks the energy and this and that.
Yeah.
But I really liked their earliest albums, which were really cool. And then they kind of morphed into the art rock, and then they made The Game, which I was very disappointed with. I don't know if you followed Queen at all.
I kind of gave up on them after they came out with that album that had oh god, what is it? It was the one for Highlander.
Oh,
The
I didn't. Once they started playing around with David Bowie, that was about the time when I was kind of losing interest in them musically. Um, the Game came out, and it was so commercial, which is not. I don't blame them. I mean, commercial. Maybe they're professional musicians, but another one bites the dust. Come on, these are
yeah.
the guys that did songs like Ogre Battle, March of the Black Queen. How Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
These rolling, sonic landscapes, and no synthesizers. It was all done with guitar, with that amazing Brian May weird custom thing that him and his dad built in his garage or something.
Hmm.
That's how we got that guitar sound.
Well, I mean, when it comes to synthesizers and stuff too, like Iron Butterfly, I was big on Iron Butterfly, like you wouldn't believe, and that
They
was
did some
before
good
my
stuff.
time.
Yeah, they did some good stuff. They were a good band.
the guy on there who did
Oh, the organs,
the
the
organs.
keyboards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the organ. He was a genius. That man was going to college when he was a teenager. He was a genius, literally.
yeah. They were all really young. I remember they were like teenagers. They were like under 20, a lot of them,
Hmm.
and like that must have been amazing. You know.
Just it was really weird, and I got to see the video that they did for Inagata Devita. Like these guys were ahead of themselves. They were doing MTV stuff. You know what I mean? Like, have you ever
Yeah,
seen the original video for that?
I don't know that I did.
It is a
I don't
trip.
think
It it
I'll have to check it
it,
out.
it like they knew that eventually that was going to be seen on a video. So they had cameramen set up. They did all the psychedelics, everything, and they went through and they
Nice,
hit each musician.
nice.
I was like, wow. I mean, and this was before anything like that. You know what I mean? Like they knew that this was going to be on television, so they made sure that they had the cameras set up, everything. It was pretty cool. I think you can
Excellent.
find it on YouTube. I'm not quite sure.
I'm sure it's somewhere. I'm sure it's somewhere. I'll have to check that out. I actually saw an interesting video the other day. We're really off topic here, but that's okay. Um, we're gonna have to land soon anyway. But it was a video of Jimi Hendrix playing acoustic guitar, which I'd never even heard him doing any acoustic before. But yeah, he's a masterful musician. Masterful musician. There were
Oh,
some very talented people around at that time. It was a strange little time when you had these many of these young artists were at that time, of course, it wasn't like today, and that's one of the advantages that a musician has today, is the audience reach. You know, you can go on YouTube now or Bandcamp, and things like that. There are a lot more opportunities for young talented people, or even old and talented people. I'm not going to be the ageist here, but for talented artists to put their work out in front of people. Of course, you're competing with 100 million other talented artists, so but that's the name of the game. But back in the old days, the bad old days, if you were going to get any kind of exposure nationwide as a musician, you had to do it through the record companies, through the media outlet. And there was that time when the record companies had no idea about this new psychedelic rock, so they were basically, here you go, boys. Here's a contract that you've got long hair and you've got an organ. Kids seem to like that, and it's like you could inadvertently sign the Mozarts of their day. I mean, you had some brilliant musicians that had opportunities that they wouldn't have even just like a few decades later because the producers caught up with the slang. Some of the guys in the subculture got involved in production and got involved in administration, and the next thing you know, the whole thing becomes, like everything else in the music industry, payola and corruption and silencing voices. I remember I saw this interview once. It was probably like in the late '80s or early '90s, and this guy was he was a big name musician, and he had signed this record deal and this and that, and they were talking about making it in the music industry, and he said, "Oh, he said though, there's you go out there and there are guys out there that are better than anyone in the record." And then he like stopped. He said, "I mean, as good as anyone that you'll hear." From the big record labels, and it's like he was right the first time, and he knew it, but he knew he'd get in trouble with the record label
yep.
if he said, "Oh, there's the really good guys never get signed." He just got signed, right?
Yeah.
and, but he was basically admitting, and and I would say this because I'd see these guys they were finding, and it's like I personally knew musicians that were better technical musicians, but they would never have access. Now they have access. So this is a very good aspect, I think, of our technology changes. It does give the individual more opportunities, even if it does allow these opportunities to more individuals. So it kind of evens things out.
I think the first time I remember really getting caught up in that is when I watched that one movie about Ray Charles, and
Hmm.
Ray Charles was talking about contract deals, and I believe they wanted to take him away from what was it? He started out in Michigan, didn't he? Detroit.
Sounds right.
Yeah, I know he was singing for Atlantic Records,
Uh-huh.
and they wanted him to actually go national instead of tour national instead of staying there locally, and,
Right.
and he told them straight out. He's like, you're gonna have to pay more if you want him to go if you want him to go anywhere other than the local areas, and that kind of blew my mind away because he had built up a reputation locally, you know, and
Right.
it would actually cause problem or harm for his local reputation by going national back then.
Huh.
You know what I mean? Because he would have to leave his home
Right.
area in order to to tour in other parts of the country and stuff. So I did find that interesting, and it was like it seems that a lot of what was being said there was that musicians were actually being held down because they wanted them to be more of a local group for when the bigger bands came into town. They would have somebody to open for them and stuff like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
that was actually a pretty good movie in that respect. I know they said that it flopped in the box offices and stuff, but I actually did pick up on some stuff on that movie.
Oh, I should check that out. Yeah. Well,
Uh,
that's the thing. When you look at music, well, you got music, obviously, people making music, but then you have the music industry, and up until recently, you had to basically buy a record from a record company, and that had to be distributed to a record store. And unless you could get the musician to come to your house and play, obviously. Um, so yeah, the for the music industry, their goal was simply to sell records.
mhm.
So that's why I say, being if you could remove musicians from that equation, it's wonderful for the music industry because musicians were always the problem to them. I think, when you're in that sort of a industrial kind of system, it's like industrial music, you see things in terms of like parts of a machine. And traditionally, I mean, those early jazz guys, jazz blues guys, some of them very popular. They'd get them in to record a couple of songs. They give them like a bottle of whiskey and buy them a meal. Here's $1, you know,
Mhm.
and they'd record something or other and sell like all these copies. Back then in like 45 or 78, RPM albums and stuff like that. But and then there was the counter punch of the agents when you had the super groups, when musicians started flexing their muscles, musicians unions, um, people realizing their own worth. But again, this was for a very, very, very few, and it naturally just kind of pushed a lot more people off the stage. I kind of like this reality we have now, where it seems there is no such thing as a level playing field as far as that goes, but there's a lot more opportunities now.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the name of the game. Whenever anything changes, we're very apt to look at the drawbacks. This isn't the same way anymore. We want things to be the same. And a lot of times it keeps us from looking at the opportunities. And that's another aspect of bringing ourselves to the present moment. So instead of bewailing what we've lost, we can wake up enough to look reality and time and space right in the face and see what we've got to do now. And as you say, Roger, do the work in front of us. And I think I am getting a signal from Shambhala International Airport. I think we are approaching. I think we had a good tailwind today. Carried us right along. I think we had a very good talk today.
Yeah, I enjoyed this too. And you're never off topic, Otto. You're always on time,
You
dude.
have no idea, my friend.
I mean, come on, dude. You're like the rock artist. You know what I'm saying? What are you talking about?
Oh man.
You're the rock
Uh,
star, dude.
well,
Well,
I don't know about that, but
if you're
well, I
if
did
you're if
open for Five Finger Death Punch once.
that's you
Not in the
did.
same building, of course, but
Well, I mean, if you're not talking about Buddha, then you should be talking about rock and roll. That's just the way it should be. You know,
that's a thought. Rock and roll Buddhism, that would be an interesting, we can combine the two. Uh,
that would be cool.
that would, well, perhaps for a future show. But for now, we're going to be pretty soon getting ready for our descent. So I'm going to be turning off the smoking lamp here in a moment and turning on the seatbelt light. But before we start all that, Roger, why don't you give people your socials so they'll know how to find you, contact you if they want to talk to you some more?
Well, if you want to find me, you can find me on Elements, Element Matrix. You can find me at the Infinite Imaginarium. You can also find me at Roger's Hangout as well as on Teams. You can find me in my own community on there called Roger's Hangout as well. Um, Also, like here with this video here, it's going to be on the wonderful world of weirdness, where we also have a Discord for the channel. So if you guys want to check that out, you can come in and check out the wonderful world of weirdness, where you can talk to me and Otto and all of the cool people on there too. So other than that, I am on minds.com as Roger underscore Hansen, and on X, Roger Hansen at ROGLOL1973. That's it.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. Whoosh.
Yeah, I know.
Take a breath.
I just got on Gab too, so that's that's another one that I just started getting onto, and I don't even know what the account is. I think it's Roger underscore Hansen at Roger underscore Hansen, I believe is what they go by on there. So that
Well,
I just started that.
you've got quite the presence on the internet. My goodness. Well, you can, of course, find me at Rogers Hangout on Teams and, of course, at the Discord for the wonderful world of weirdness. Otherwise, I'm on minds.com at AutoX. And, of course, please check out my website about Buddhism. It's called navakavada.org. That's Navakavada. It's spelled just like it sounds. Yeah, otherwise, and we've got a Navakavada BitChute channel, which is some older stuff, a Navakavada YouTube channel, which is some newer stuff. And of course, you might run into me down at the corner, and messenger pigeons have been known to reach me. So I am going to turn off the smoking lamp and turn on the seatbelt light. Please return your seats to an upright position. The stewards will be by to collect any hash pipes, rolling papers, or other paraphernalia in preparation for landing. We are now approaching Shambhala International Airport. Those who are continuing on to Agartha, please remain in your seats. Otherwise, we'll be deplaning there as soon as we finish our landing. So, thanks again, everyone, for being part of our show. Thanks to our returning listeners, and greetings to all of our new listeners. And hopefully, we will see you all next week.